we're going to talk about how my guest, who is a freight agent, went through my program, Freight Broker Bootcamp, and then started his own freight agency and is now making six figures working from home from Canada, right? So he's got a really cool story. We're going to dive into it. This is my guest, Mohsin Sheikh. Is that correct?
That is correct, Dennis.
Mohsin Sheikh.
Hi,
All right.
Dennis.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited that you're here. Give everybody a quick 60-second intro into you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mohsin Sheikh. I got acquainted to logistics and being a freight agent back in Ukraine, where I was actually studying. I'm actually from India, by the way. And I was studying in Ukraine back in 2019. And that's where I got a part-time job as a student, as a cold caller. And it was a freight brokerage company. I hated that job. I really didn't like it. It was very depressing, but I somehow survived there for a few months. And I finally left the job. But that is the point where I realized that this might be something, that I could scale up on and I could work on. And I tried to find some sources, and I ended up coming across the Freight Broker Bootcamp. I started from the YouTube videos, and I got really interested in that. So that's how I went on, and I started as an agent in October of 2020. And here I am now with Dennis.
Okay, awesome. So originally you were born and raised in India.
Yeah.
You moved to the Ukraine as a student. That was your first experience with the freight brokerage business, right? You started doing cold calls. It wasn't very fun. You moved on, migrated to Canada. Now you live in Canada.
True.
And you're also a student. Am I correct?
That is correct.
What? Okay,
Yes.
so talk to us about that. Are you a full-time student, part-time student? What are you studying?
I'm studying business management. I'm a full-time student, and I'm also doing freight brokerage as an agent.
You heard it correctly, people. He's a full-time student, which means he's probably doing 15 credits or more, right? I mean, credit hours, he's got probably 4 or 5 classes per semester, right? Something like that. Yeah. And he's also an agent. Now, tell us, just to kind of tease everybody along here, in February, the last month, it's actually in January. I'm sorry, it's February now. In January, tell us what your numbers were as an agent: gross sales, gross profit.
In revenue, it was 120,000, and we did around 18,500, or approximately, in gross profit.
And then you as an agent, what's your commission split?
It's 70%.
70%. So
yes.
It's pretty easy math, people. 70% of 18,000, if I'm not mistaken, that's probably around 13 grand.
Yeah.
So I would dare to say that you are probably the only student in your entire school, let alone the business management program, that has a business that he's already running, that he's making, that he just made roughly estimate $13,000 a month in profit from. Okay. So number one, congrats to you. I mean, that's amazing. I say that because it's hard enough to run a business, right? Especially a startup, right? A young business. It's hard enough to be a full-time student, but it's really hard to do both and do them both well, right? So, I mean, I don't want to overlook that. That's very important. It's the first. I think that's the first I've ever had a student who was running a business while still a student. I've had them, they were still driving truck, or they were still had another job of some sort, but I think it's the first time student-wise. So congrats on that. So when did you launch your brokerage?
So I started as a freight agent with a brokerage company back in October 2020. So initially, of course, I didn't have any customers. I did have the skills and knowledge of how to get customers, because I used to work. I did that part-time job as a cold caller.
Right.
And that's where I started. I did remember some of the contacts that I might have made some positive contacts with, and I started with them. And I remember the first month, which was October of 2020, I made $630 in profit. So
$630 in profit.
$630 in profit. And And for some reason, I thought like, okay, this sounds good. This can work out. So yeah, that was the first month. Because I was still studying, and I am still studying at the moment as well. It wasn't really easy to do both the things at once. But because I was still in Ukraine at that time, I used to study in the morning, and I used to do this from evening to midnight, because we have a time difference between the US and Ukraine. So it somehow worked out that way. And then I moved to Canada in 2021. The time difference went away for some reasons, and I couldn't really manage my studies and work at once. So that is when I decided to hire people. And at the moment, I have 2 employees who work for me. They work remotely from India, and I personally trained them online, of course. I taught them what they need to know, how to do things. And yeah, that's how it's going so far.
All right, great. So you had both of those going on at once. So you probably weren't getting a whole lot of sleep.
Yeah.
And then once you migrated to Canada, you're in the Toronto area, right?
Yes, I am.
You then, time difference didn't work in your favor, so you had to hire some employees. So you actually have employees that are remote, that live in India, that you trained. And what are the jobs that they're doing? Describe the jobs. Are they mainly on the operations side, finding trucks and dispatching and doing that, or are they mainly on the sales side?
They're mainly on the operations side. They deal with the carriers and finding trucks and everything, because as I told you, I deal with power only. So truck is something we find for our trailers, being trailer as our commodity. So that's my niche.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. That was going to be my next question. So your niche is power only, right? So power only. For people that don't understand that, can you describe that for them? Because we have a lot of new people, and even people that have experience that have never heard of that niche. Talk to us a little bit about your niche.
Power only is that we deal with trailers. Our commodity itself is trailer. So we have customers who are either manufacturers, dealers, or just any other person who has trailers, and they need it to be moved from point A to B. Maybe they're sending it to their customers, or they maybe need these trailers to be sent to some of their other facilities, or maybe they're just dealers who need all these trailers going to their different locations to be sold. So all those kind of people, the customers that we deal with, and so that is basically our commodity. And
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So anybody who needs to move a trailer from point A to point B, you provide the power, you provide the tractor, not the trailer.
Right.
Okay, cool. Exactly. All right. So yeah, that's an interesting niche. So how did you come upon that niche? Why did you decide on that niche? What was your process? What was your thought process there?
It again goes back to my cold calling job that I was working with. So they were having some different niches when the list that I was working on was a power only niche.
Gotcha.
And so it's just that I felt comfortable doing that.
It makes sense. You had some familiarity with it, right? You had some familiarity from a previous job, which is no different than somebody else who maybe used to work in the steel industry, and now they're going to focus on the steel niche, or used to work in the produce industry. They're going to focus on the produce niche, or the oil and gas industry, vice versa. I mean, it's all the same, right? You use something that was familiar to you, that you had a little bit of experience with, and then you dove in and you expanded on it. No, I love that. I think that's a very simple approach. I mean, it doesn't always have to be super complicated, right? Figuring out your niche. Sometimes it's the least common denominator. Okay. So I think that makes sense. So I love the fact that you're very niched down, right? First, how long did it take you to move your first load? I know you did $630 in profit your first month, but how long did it take you to move your first load? A week or 2 or 3? How long did it take you before you think, roughly, did you move your first load?
I think it was around 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks. Okay, cool. All right, great.
Weeks, yeah.
And talk to us about that customer experience. How did that happen? Was it somebody that you had talked to in the past? Was it a cold call? Did you use LinkedIn? Did you meet them face to face? I mean, what was that experience like?
First of all, when I started, I was really reluctant to do the cold calls all over again, because that's the only way I knew how it could be done, how I could get customers. But anyways, I started Googling for, different manufacturers and dealers who deal with my niche. And I came across a few websites, and I got a few emails, and I sent them a few emails. And maybe it was one of the days that I got a response with a list of units or trailers they have that needs to be moved. And I was like, okay, here it is. We already have a customer. I guess I have a customer already, and we have no contact, and I haven't contacted him or anything. I just sent like a bunch of emails, like bulk emails to different different prospects, and they just responded with a list of okay, here is what we have. If you could help, we could work something out. And I started working on that list, and I believe that was the second week when I ended up moving the first load.
So did you move the first load without ever having a conversation with the shipper, or did you actually have a conversation with them before?
I never had a conversation with them before and until I moved that trailer.
Gotcha. Okay. So they sent out a load list because they saw that you might be able to help them. You then worked on that. We're fortunate enough. Now, how many loads did they send you? How many trailers or opportunities did they send you?
It was roughly maybe 10 to 15.
And out of that, you were able to move one load.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm talking about the first one.
Yes. Yeah. And then they continued to send you.
Then eventually,
right? Yeah. And so sometimes that's the way it starts, right? He emailed a bunch of companies in his niche. A few of them responded. They gave him an opportunity. And then at that point, he capitalized on the opportunity. Now, what I don't want you guys to get stuck on is the fact that he did it all by email. Because whether you do it by email or whether you do it by phone or whether you do it by face-to-face, it's the same thing, okay? He started a conversation, and then at that point, when they gave him an opportunity, he capitalized on it, right? So not everybody's story of using load lists works that way, right? A lot of times shippers will send out load lists, and by the time you cover that load, and call them back or you email them back, the load's already covered, right? And so sometimes that will happen. And so it gets very frustrating. And ideally, you probably don't operate that way now. You probably operate with your shippers where they give you dedicated freight. Is that one of the primary ways that you work? So you're not really working off of, they send you a list of 20 loads and then you just happen to cover one. You work on them all and hopefully cover one. It doesn't work that way anymore. Are you more dedicated? They say, oh, hey, we want you to move these 3 loads.
Right now I have pretty, let's say, a few good amount of customers that that give most of the businesses. So for some of them, it's like they send us a list, but it's an open list. But for some of them, they give us dedicated loads, and they expect us to move them within a given frame of time.
Which do you prefer, and which is more profitable?
It all depends on the lanes. Once again. If it's not a good lane, we can't really, it gets difficult to find a carrier locally who is willing to move it.
Perfect. Okay, great. So that describes a little bit about your first experience. So you were a little bit hesitant to do cold calling because of your past experience and the pain you kind of felt when you were working in Ukraine. And so you kind of went to cold email. And then now, are you doing the way you're getting customers now, new customers now? Are you still leading, kind of using cold email? Are you cold calling? Are you getting referrals? How are the new customers coming? Like the last customer that you got, that you moved loads for, how did that customer come about?
The last one I would say was a referral, but I still do continue the cold calling. And after watching all those videos with the Freight Broker Bootcamp, I started getting with the LinkedIn and all those sort of approaches, which I didn't do before. But I think it's a great approach. to have a soft touch with the prospects on LinkedIn, and to even cold call, but because it still works for some reason. For me, it still works. Although I don't like it, I hate it, but that's something I still think is a great approach. And I most of the customers I have been working with are through cold calls.
So here's what I want you guys to understand. You know, Mohsin is on the whatever it takes plan. He doesn't enjoy cold calling. Very few people do.
Yeah.
Right. So the point is, though, he's made the commitment to himself and to his business that he's going to, it's worth the time and energy and the pain associated with the rejection you get, because the return can be significant. And so here's my question. Like you did $18,000 in profit in January. We just talked about that a minute ago. Out of that $18,000, how many customers does that different customers does that represent? Roughly.
I would say 5 to 7.
This is what I want you guys to hone in on. You can build a 6-figure income working from home as a full-time student from Canada by having 5 or 6 customers. Not 50, not 500, 5 or 6. So here's the cool part. If that's as far as Mohsin's goals go, is wanting to make a 6-figure income, make $18,000 a month, he probably doesn't have to do a ton more of cold calling. He probably doesn't have to go out and do a lot of prospecting, no matter what channel, because he's got an established customer base. Now, there's always going to be a certain amount of attrition, but I can assure you, I don't know Mohsin very well, but I can tell you, I bet he's not doing 100 cold calls a day. I bet that he's not doing 50 cold calls a day. I bet on most days he might do 10 or 20. Is that pretty accurate?
Absolutely. That is exact figure.
Yeah. And so I want you to, it's important that we tell this story, Mohsin, because a lot of people have a misconception that, they're going to be making 100 or 200 cold calls a day for the rest of their life. That's not the way it works. If you choose to do that up front, great. What you're going to do is you're going to be able to fold time. And what I mean by that is you're going to be able to compress your learning curve. You're going to be able to fill your funnel, and you're going to be able to create more opportunities. But that isn't for everybody, and that's okay. We've seen lots of students as well as non-students get customers through referrals, get customers face-to-face, get customers using LinkedIn, get customers cold calling and emailing, cold emailing. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. So I love the fact that you used email, but you've now realized that email's not the only way you can do it. You're using LinkedIn, you're using cold calling, you're using other channels and other strategies. So I love that. Congrats on that. Let me move into a question that I get a lot about, and maybe you could lend your experience to it. And that is this, markets go up and down, right? The truck to load ratio, sometimes rates are going up because there's less trucks than there are loads. Sometimes there's rates go down because there's more trucks than there is loads, right? So there's that supply and demand, and each market is different. How do you accurately and effectively provide freight quotes for your shippers? So what is the process for you? Because you obviously, you're not always the cheapest. You're not always the most expensive, but you're providing a quote that creates enough value for the shipper and enough profit for you that it's worthwhile for both parties to engage. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Let's say I also do some loads, for example, in terms of harvest.
Okay.
If we talk about that, I use the DAT tool to get an average. Mm-hmm. And I ask my employees to get in touch with the carriers who have trucks available in those lanes, and to get some sense of what rates are they looking for, and to get those numbers out. And then I go back to the customer and I quote for that particular lane. However, it's very different with the power only.
Okay, so talk to us about how you price the power only.
That's my main niche.
Yes.
It's been pretty standard. We have a standard figure depending on some particular lanes, and depending, of course, on the distance that it is covering. If it is going to be a load out or a towaway move, considering those factors, and depending, of course, on the weather conditions and the market conditions, there are some specific numbers that has been, for some reason, working out and throughout those years since I started, and it's still working.
So you do a per mile plus fuel rate then?
Yes, yes.
So you have a per mile plus fuel rate based upon the market that they're coming in and out of, right? So if it's hypothetically, if it was Buffalo to Atlanta, it would have probably a different rate than Boston to Chicago, right? Okay, right. Good. So you have done enough research and spent enough time and done enough due diligence to understand what the per mile plus fuel rate is. And then you plug those matrix, you plug those rates into the miles and into the seasonality and the conditions that are going on. And that allows you to find a truck and still make a margin.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes our margins are, let's say, 20%. Sometimes it could be 70%.
Right. And sometimes they're even lower, right? I mean, ultimately, if you did 18,000 in profit off 123,000 in gross, that's probably about 15%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're in the same range of profit margin than most brokers. 15% is typically the norm, right? So I like that. All right, cool. So that's a little bit about that. So talk to us about what would be your best piece of advice to a new broker that is looking to get his or her first shipper. What would be your best piece of advice? If you could give them one piece of advice, if you had just hired them and you sat them down day one and you said, okay, this is the most important thing you need to understand, what would that be?
I would say it would be persistence and just not to give up or to lose hope. You have to be spontaneous. You have to, even if you hate that, even if you, let's say, hate cold calling, even if you hate searching through the emails and Google and LinkedIn, you will eventually find that one person who would let you in and get you started, and other things would follow up on. Like with me, I hated cold calling. I didn't like it at all, but I still do it because I know it works for me. So persistence, of course, patience, and I would say connection and networking is all you need to get started, and not to give hope, of course, because a lot of people, I believe, would just give up because it's too much stress, and you get nervous about these cold calls, these rejections that you get, because of course 95% of the times those calls would be rejections. Those would be the results, but you don't need that 95%. You only need that 1% to let you in, and that's how you get started.
Yeah, I love that. So it's really more around mindset, right? What you notice, he didn't focus in on some specific script. He didn't focus in on some specific niche. He didn't focus in on some, how to do X, Y, Z. What he focused in on was your mindset, because that's really what it is, right? Going into this, and this is what I like. This is what I used to tell people when I would hire them. It was like this. Listen, I know you don't like to cold call. Nobody likes to cold call. But here's the thing. If I told you that you had to clean toilets every day for the next year for free, now let that sink in. You had to clean toilets every day for the next year for free with no pay. But after that year, you were financially free, you were making six figures, and you would never have to make another cold call again in your life. Would you do it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing I can tell you. I'll cold call all day long and twice on Sundays till I'm blue in the face versus having to clean toilets. And listen, there's people that clean toilets. There's nothing wrong with that. But the fact is, most of them probably wish they were doing something else, right? Mm-hmm. And so it really comes back to that mindset, right? It really does come back to that mindset. So I'm glad that you focused in on that. All right, Mohsin. So let me ask you this. Is there any final words you want to share with the audience?
I would say that all those people who are getting started, if it's going to be difficult, it's not going to be easy. You would be, stressed at times. You would be feeling down at times, but it's all about, you have to be consistent. You have to not give up and just follow the process. Just look for the videos and advices on Freight Broker Bootcamp. And it has helped me out a lot, because I was just a cold caller for that company. I didn't know anything about how the whole system works, how to get carriers, how to post loads, where to, all those lanes, how to quote. I had no idea whatsoever about it. I was just a usual cold caller. That was my job, just to, sell the script. I had this idea that, okay, this might be something, I feel I might be interested in. And I got started. That way I came across Dennis videos of Dennis on YouTube, and I really liked his approach, and I ended up being a member with the Freight Broker Bootcamp. It's really worth it if you are willing to stick to it.
Love it. Perfect. And listen, guys, for those of you that aren't aware, Mohsin went through my Freight Broker Bootcamp. My Freight Broker Bootcamp is something I've had for over a decade. We've trained over 10,000 students. We offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. If for any reason you're not happy, nobody else does that. Mohsin is a testament to that. Obviously, my course gave him a little bit of guidance and a little bit of confidence, but he did all the hard work, right? And you can tell why he's been successful. He's followed the plan, right? He became an agent. He niched down. He did his prospecting. He learned how to provide accurate freight quotes. When he ran into an obstacle time-wise, he hired a couple of employees to try to make sure he could cover the loads. So he's doing all the right things. And so I want to congratulate you, number one. Thank you, number two. And totally appreciate you being here. And I look forward, maybe we'll have you back on in another year with a quick update as to how everything's going in your business. So thank you so much. Listen, everybody, if you're curious about becoming a freight agent or a freight broker, and you don't quite know where to go and you're looking for some direction, right? You're on YouTube, you're on Google, and you just can't piece it all together. Check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Trained over 10,000 students, had that training program for over a decade, and we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. I can't make it any easier than that. Check it out at freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Thank you for joining me.